Shared?
Yeah.
Yes, come on.
Okay.
Take it away.
So, fine. So I'm going to talk about a new proposal for scroll timing. Follow up of my presentation and feedback about scroll challenges. This is very initial and looking for feedback. Okay, just a second. For some reason, the slide is not changing. Okay, did it? I don't know what's going on. I know. So what is scroll? Let's start with some general definition. So general movement of overflowing content triggered by user interaction or code to reveal content outside the view. So this is our definition. It's not probably not the only definition, but what I like about it is it focuses on the movement and the interaction aspects of scroll. And in general, it starts with the user starts some sort of gesture to initiate the scroll. Couple of frames presented the screen. User stops interacting to force the scroll, and then at some point, a frame is presented that what we consider the scroll interaction. So why do we need more metrics? So scroll is a very common interaction in many applications, and it is one of the, in many cases, it's one of the biggest contributor to the perception of users of how the application behaves and how performant it is. And it's not easy today to actually measure it reliably and detect regressions when they happen. Oh, sorry about that, technical difficulties. So what are the gaps in the current web performance APIs? So if you want to measure scroll, we don't have any visibility on when the scroll is started, when the gesture that initiated the scroll began, and then we don't know when the first response for the user, like we have for event timing, was displayed. There's no visibility when the movement ended. So scrolling is about movement. So even if the user did not release the scroll gesture interface, for example, did not move the scroll bar and then paused moving it, that's essentially ended the interaction. We have no visibility to that. We can pull the DOM or with some debounce, but that's not entirely accurate. Also about if there's some smoothness aspects we want to measure, or checkerboarding when frames are not rendered fully on by the browser. There's no way to measure that or get any reliable or meaningful measurement. And more aspects about the scroll that it's usually are important when doing analytics and analysis of the impact is the scroll velocity and what gesture was used to actually trigger it. So the proposal is published in GitHub. There's a short link for it. It's based on the Performance Observer API, introducing a new performance scroll timing entry that can be observed with the scroll entry type. So what kind of attributes are exposed to this proposal? The first one is the start time. It's the hardware start time of when the interaction for the gesture that forced scroll started. And then we present the first frame time, the first frame after the start time, and the overall duration. And I'll talk about in more details what that means. Frame expected and frame produced are metrics related to smoothness. Frame expected is defined as how, in ideal world of how many frames that a device could have been presenting during the scroll time, and frame produces how many frames were actually produced. The difference between them is obviously the dropped frames measurement. Visual stability, checkerboarding. If the browser cannot present frame, we would like to measure the time that the user did not see full content during the scroll, and some metrics that can help other aspects like the delta, position changes, scroll source, various sources, and the target, which is the DOM node or the document that was scrolling. So let's go back again to the scroll timeline. It all starts when the user starts a scroll gesture, maybe starts touching the screen and start moving its finger or dragging or the scroll bar or anything like that. And on the right side, it ends when the last frame is presented. So all that's like you call duration for the scroll timing entry, performance entry, from start to end. So the next thing that happens is the frame is presented. The first frame after the gesture was triggered, and that would be the scroll latency or responsiveness, however we want to call it. And then potentially some other frame presented, and then some frame was checkerboarded, and all the time that frame were partially presented should accumulate to the metric of checkerboard time. Potentially a frame can be dropped, not produced and presented on the screen, and that would not be counted for the produced frame, and then the last frame will be presented. Now, what is the last frame? It's tricky to define, and that's going to happen now on the next slide. There are a couple of ways to define it. First of all, if the user stops the gesture and immediately the scroll stops, for example, it uses the scroll bar, moves it, and then releases the mouse, immediately the scrolling is supposed to stop, usually, and that would end the scroll. But also, if the user stops moving, let's say using the scroll bar, moves it, and then stops moving, and even if it did not release the scroll thumb, the scroll should end after some time. I'm thinking about 150 milliseconds as more detection for idle movement. Seems reasonable around usually the response time of 100 milliseconds of noticeable delay with some buffer. If the user changes the direction of the scrolling, that's a completely new interaction. I think should be considered like that, and then we trigger a new scroll measurement in that case. And if there's a momentum scroll on touchscreen, usually when the scroll momentum pauses, then the scroll itself should be completed. So users should use it like any typical performance observer API, adding the scroll type for the observed entry, and then inside the callback can collect information and compute some performance metrics. Here, for example, there's like latency, maybe smoothness based on the frames, checkerboarding percent, and velocity. These are just examples, not prescribed by the proposal. If there are more ideas of what we'd like to measure, then that's up to the users of the API. The API goal is not to address general animation smoothness. That's a much bigger scope than just scroll interactions, and so it's not fully. It does not cover the solution for full animation smoothness metrics. And also, as I said, we're not prescribing any thresholds, targets, or anything like that. That's up to the users of the API to define, or maybe a follow-up project to trying to define them as an industry guideline. And also, we want to make sure that we're reducing fingerprinting, ensure privacy. So some open questions we have, and I'd like to get feedback from folks. First of all, is the API, people feel, can be useful, or is the problem some important problem that relevant folks, web developers, RUM providers, or any performance experts think could help understanding scroll performance better, if assuming scroll is an important aspect of the user experience, and if the API could be useful in the current shape that's proposed. Second, I mentioned that it doesn't cover smoothness, but the way it's defined, it actually touches some aspects of smoothness, like frame produced and frame expected. Perhaps it should be defined in a way that shared common structure for potential smoothness API instead of defining it explicitly for the scroll API. Another open question is whether discrete scroll, like when you're using keyboard for scrolling or using programmatic API, is that even needed to be included in this API or not? The rationale here is that there's potential overlap with event timing API that already capture the interaction time and the next frame. And since discrete scroll typically include a single frame, there's some overlap. So that's kind of still open question. I'd like to hear if anyone have thoughts on that. Another thing that is the scroll bar.
So one quick question, one immediate question. Oh,
sorry, but we'll do like a discussion after the presentation. Okay, so like it's just a few more minutes. Scroll bar is not a source that currently is possible to even collect with existing web APIs, but so it's not currently in a proposal exposed as a new scroll source. However, there is a good argument why it should be a scroll source, because from metrics in Chromium, we know that scroll bar is a huge contributor to checkerboarding. When checkerboarding happens, it, in high probability as a result of scroll bar used for long duration scrolls or long distance scrolls. Another thing is frame expected. Frame expected is the device frame rate, however it's defined. But it can be argued that we don't want to expose it explicitly, and we can want to standardize on the guideline of 60 frames per second and not expose additional information by this API, although it can be useful to measure smoothness. Another question, the API does not expose any smoothness metric, it just exposes some raw data, raw metrics, but there are the industry already knows how to measure some aspects of smoothness, like using root mean squares of frame duration, the harmonic FPS, and so on. Should the API expose them as well, or that's something that should not be added to such API? And another open question, should we address variable speed? So when we start scrolling, potentially we are changing the speed. So there are different aspects of scrolling fast and scrolling slow, but the way the API currently is proposed, it would not differentiate between them if it's all part of a single interaction. So you start scroll, move fast, and then doing slow, it's still going to be aggregate as an average and may not be a good representation of the real user experience. And a few more other open questions. I don't want to read them, but if it's interesting anyone, I'll be happy to hear. And any other feedback that I didn't mention. So what are the next step for this API is just to collect feedback and continue prototyping. There's an issue. I'll be happy to see if folks want to put feedback there or email directly or any other way. I'll be happy to get feedback on this. And I think I'm going to show a quick demo of a prototype for this. So hold on. Let's see if it works. Okay, I'm sharing another screen. Let me know if you see it. Can you see the other screen?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so this is a demo of the prototype of this API. So
I'm not sure we're seeing the screen you intend for us to see. We're not seeing a presentation. We're seeing a screen saying picture in picture is open.
Huh. So hold on. I think thought I was presenting it for some reason. But now?
Yeah, that seems.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not that familiar with this tool. Okay, so this is a demo of a prototype for the API, and it implements the API, and you can see that if I scroll, it runs an observer, and then it just logs the performance timing entry with the metrics I described, and some calculated metrics based on that. If I use the wheel, the mouse wheel, you see like the scroll source changes, and then the other metrics are collected. And that's all I wanted to show, and I think we should go to the discussion now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me stop the recording.